The following talk was given at the Insight Meditation Center in Redwood City, California. Please visit our website at audiodharma.org.
Good morning. It felt very silent and still and sweet in here, so it's a little reluctant to ring the bell. And I was remembering there are stories about the early days at Zen Center, San Francisco Zen Center, and where Suzuki Roshi would ring the bell to start the sitting, and then he would, sometimes he'd stay in the meditation hall, but sometimes he'd walk out, and then one day he didn't come back, and they weren't sure whether, it was sort of a teaching that, just extending the sitting, or did he fall asleep, or... And in Zen, the stakes are a little higher because you're sitting in a little more formal way and not supposed to move. And I think in those days, there weren't chairs, people couldn't sit on chairs, so everyone was sort of on the floor and knees, screaming, and in the silence, and then, just when they couldn't take it anymore, in he walks, just taking his time, and so I thought just this morning, I have some idea of something a topic to talk a little bit about, but I thought if anyone has a question or something that's, to take advantage of the fact that, it's a more intimate size, I'm interested to know what you're interested in, and something that you're curious about, a Dharma topic, or something that's, come up in your meditation practice, or and if nothing comes to mind, that's totally fine. I'm happy to share what's interesting to me, but. Go ahead. Yeah, if you don't mind, just. I think either one of those should work, and if you just switch it on.
When your mind is particularly active during a meditation.
Maybe hold it a little bit closer. Yeah.
When your mind is a little.
Yeah.
Is very active during a meditation session, and very, very active, what kinds of suggestions do you have?
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Did everybody hear the question? When the mind is very active, and active with thinking, or active with, emotion?
Thinking and conversations with other people.
Conversations, yeah. So, in a way, this is a good segue into what I was thinking about talking about. In a way, so I'll start with that and maybe just incorporate it in. One of the, I think one of the common views about meditation is that maybe the purpose of meditation is to quiet the mind, is to stop thinking, or develop a state of calmness, a bit, something like that, and of course that's part of it. That's definitely part of the practice, and but for example, one of the ways a teacher could respond if he went to the teacher and said, "Oh, there's a lot of thinking in my meditation," the teacher may say, "What's wrong with thinking?" Or something. That's what minds do. Minds think. And there's a certain approach to, one approach to meditation, or one approach is it's almost like to not try to change the mind at all. Like to leave everything exactly as it is. There's a saying. The student asked the teacher, something like, "What is the way of all the Buddhas and ancestors?" Something like that. And the teacher says, "Your ordinary mind is the way." And the teacher doesn't say, "Sit down and totally change what's happening in your mind," or totally fix, or totally stop your thinking and replace, surgically cut out all the negative things, replace them with all the positive things, and that's the way. But it doesn't say that. The teacher says, your mind, just as it is, this is the way. This is the way. And then in the story, the student says, "Okay, well, how do I direct myself toward it?" And the teacher says, "If you try to direct yourself towards it, you've already missed it." If you're trying to make something happen, produce some experience, if you're trying to make any kind of change, there's sometimes, or often there's a kind of built in to trying to have something different is resistance to the way things are right now. And so the teacher is pointing out how things are right now. We come to practice because we think how things are right now are a problem. And is there a way that the mind we have right now is actually perfect, just the way it is? And it's in our resistance to that we suffer, and I think this style, this approach to practice, is a wonderful antidote to the sort of self-improvement culture, or the self-improvement. There's always something we can be doing. We could be exercising a little more. You could be more concentrated, or you could be nicer, kinder. And I know one Buddhist teacher who says, someone said to him something like, "I thought Buddhist teachers were supposed to be kind." And he said something like, "Oh, I'm not that kind of Buddhist." Not that there's anything wrong with being kind, and being kind is wonderful. But he was sort of going for the side of that he'd rather be honest than be kind. And not that these are necessarily, opposed to each other. But this sort of teaching is an antidote to when we, there's a way that, especially if someone has done a fair bit of meditation practice or gone on retreats, or where there can almost be a sort of excessive preoccupation with our own experience, and we can go from not paying any attention to our own experience when we start meditating, and this is something that's very new and very radically different. And okay, it's possible to be mindful and develop this muscle of attention and be here, and this is wonderful. But it's also possible that it can veer into what one teacher has called spiritual narcissism. I don't know if you've heard that term. And where it's we're so focused on my own, my own moment-to-moment experience, my own concentration, my own, so this is one direction that practice can go, and it's completely normal, and it's completely, and then so one of the antidotes to that is the teacher, maybe the teacher saying, the way is right under your feet, or this kind of thing, or your ordinary mind is the way, or and this is one of the things that I was thinking to talk about, is that we can sometimes for ourselves notice a shift, that where practice, what becomes more alive or more interesting is not so much what my own experience is like on the cushion, but sort of like the world around us, and we start to be more interested or more curious and more attentive to other people, or to the community, the center, the people in our lives. How is practice sort of being expressed in my life? And maybe a better barometer for how my practice is going is not so much of what happened during a sitting, but am I easier to get along with? Am I easier to live with? How are my relationships? So that sense of sort of being more engaged with others, more taking responsibility for the larger, that practice isn't just an inner experience, but that somehow the boundaries between inside and outside, between self and other, start to soften. And, and so there's this sense of, it's all me, in a way, So that's one possible answer to your question. I don't know, that's a long... Yeah.
Hello?
I think
Am
it's
I on?
I think it's on.
And I come here and have for a while, not too long, maybe a year. My thinking is a source of all my suffering, and it's without any solution. Of late, when I'm in meditation, my thinking is exacerbated, and it could be on my finances, relationships, my profession, whatever it is. I'm not finding any refuge. I just want moments where I'm here. Can I have just moments where I am actually present? And for example, this last meditation I just sat in a couple minutes ago, it was the worst it's ever been. And I don't know if it was because I was doing a lot of thinking driving here and just didn't have time, the time I needed to kind of calm down enough to stay focused. But, I just want some refuge. I want to be present. And even as I look back at my life at, 57 years old, the most intimate parts of my life have been when I have been present with the people I love, either in my job or my relationship or my children. That's what I'm going to take away when I die. Not all this incredible thinking with absolutely no solution except suffering.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you have, there's one level of awareness when we're just so caught in our thinking that, and so absorbed in the movie, in the storyline, we believe that's who we are. We believe that's what our life is. And it sounds like you have the awareness to see that this thinking is creating suffering, and that there's something that can have some degree of distance, even if it's just a millimeter of distance from the thoughts at times, and step back and say, wow, and that it's not being imposed from the outside. It's something that we do. So that's great. That's great to see that. And although this may sound like it's making the suffering worse, there's a real value to taking moments and really feeling the suffering, the dukkha that the thinking creates. It's like really letting that register that, where is the pain? Where do you feel the pain in the body? Where, it's like, because that's all happening in the present moment, and that's using mindfulness. If there's aversion to thinking, resistance to thinking, the feeling like you want to get rid of it, you don't want it to be there, which is totally understandable. But it can be that it's that very resistance is sort of like what locks the thinking in place. And So one of the practices that we sometimes teach is this practice of noting thoughts or labeling thoughts. And I don't know if you've had any, so sometimes, just like we say, just to almost imagine you're like a cat waiting for the mouse to come out of the mouse hole. So you're just there, you're waiting for something to happen. And then when thinking comes up, and you just go, wait, thinking. This thinking is happening. You may not catch it on the first thought. You may not catch it on the 10th thought. But at a certain time, you say, okay, thinking is happening. And the whole purpose of your meditation is not to stop thinking, not to get calm, not to be peaceful, but it's just to do mindfulness of thinking. It's like a video game, and something comes up, and you're, okay, thinking. Notice the thinking. And noticing the tone of voice that is it like, thinking, or is it, thinking, with as much compassion, with as much care as you can. Okay, thinking. And if you can let it go, let it go. And it may come back in the next moment, but coming back to the body, the breath, and then, thinking, come back. So that's one practice that I found helpful. Another one that can be helpful is, this is good, especially if you're a little bit skeptical of what the content of the thoughts are. It's like, is this, what, this is not that helpful. This is not even true, these thoughts. So this is not even, is to almost like very gently repeat the thought back. This is like a form of labeling the thought. So, it could be as simple as, you're having a thought about where to have lunch. And then you repeat back, oh, thinking about where to have lunch. And you just repeat it back. It's a way of sort of having a little more distance from the thoughts, and it's also a way of having a little objectivity. If the thinking starts to get, thinking about if anyone really likes me, and you kind of think about it. You hear it, and it's like, oh, that's interesting. Or I think, and so we start to sort of get to know ourselves a little bit more, and start to question the authority that we give to the thinking. Because, we suffer from thinking because we're giving it the power. A thought, if you think of what is a thought, it's the most insubstantial thing. It has no color, it has no shape, it has no weight. But when we don't see it, or we're not mindful of it as a thought, we believe it. And then it takes on this power. It's like, thoughts are like, as one of my teachers says, are like little dictators, ordering us around and making us do things, and, when we don't see them as thoughts. So this is sort of the difference between, is thinking a big problem that we need to overcome, or are thoughts just the most natural thing in the world? If we see them, and then it's like, oh, it's like, it's another aspect of experience, like the breath, like sounds in the room, like the body sensations. So all of the meditation practices are ways of sort of like disembedding the thoughts and allowing them to just be what they are, which is just something else in our experience. I don't know if that's... Did you want to say something first, and then?
This was along the lines of the daily living. And I was talking about this with my husband last night. There's like this experience of, you were kind of talking about noticing the world around us, this wondrous expansion of oneness, right? It's this, and that's so true and there all the time. And yet, in daily living, there's this focus that happens, right? To get something done or work on something or resist something, whatever. There's this focus that happens. And it feels like in the focus, that expansion isn't so present, or there isn't such awareness of that. So then there develops this duality, right, where I'm going in and out and in and out, which is better than not doing that. But I was wondering, is that just kind of how it is and we flow with it? Or as we develop and become more accustomed to awareness, that then that duality just starts to sort of evaporate. We can actually experience it all as one, whether we're focusing or not, over time. Yeah. That was kind of the question. Like, this is just a developmental thing, so just kind of breathe with it, or is there something that different that needs to be gotten or understood?
Yeah. No, I think so. Part of the skill of meditation practice is, it's sort of like what we were talking about with thinking, is like there's a place for thinking, in life. It's, just like there's a place for all the different things, having conversations with people, focusing on something very particularly, and one of the interesting things of what that I remember of when I was living in a Buddhist monastery and talking to one of the senior students, and they're in the kitchen chopping, in the kitchen chopping. You're not really supposed to talk, but maybe I had a question or something, and the person would be chopping, and then I asked a question, and then they put down their thing, the knife and then turn to me. And, in this very complete, full way answer the question. And then they say, thank you, and then they kind of go back to chopping. And then I, had another question for the other thing. And turned to me, answered the question. And then I quickly got that if I wanted the lunch to ever happen, I needed to stop talking and asking questions and actually let them cook. And so that's one way of, I tend to associate this with a sort of Zen thing of doing one thing at a time, and giving whoever you're with your undivided attention as much as possible. And that's such a beautiful gift, especially to another person, to a child. In some ways, I think that there's, to be sure, there's something like awareness or attention is very close to love. So children need that. They need that love and need that attention, and we all need it, and we all need that. And there's I'm as guilty of this as anyone. You get an email or something, and my daughter is like, "Papa, Papa, Papa," and I'm like, "Yes, yes," but she won't stop until I turn around and look at her, and and it's like she's learned to kind of, get what she needs, and so that kind of giving your whole being to someone, doing one thing at a time, really, we enjoy our life more when we're not, divided and multitasking, and so there's certainly that. But I remember one time I said to one of my teachers, Mel, who was a Zen teacher, I said something about, or I said to him, well, you would never, being a Zen teacher, you would never read the newspaper while you have breakfast, right? Or, we're talking about, and he said, when I eat breakfast and read the newspaper, I just eat breakfast and read the newspaper. When I drive and listen to the radio, I just drive and listen to the radio. And so not even to be too precious about that there's something about finding the flow, and maybe this, I hope, maybe this just between being present, being aware, and then having a sort of naturalness, which I associate as part of the practice, and a naturalness, and knowing when is it really important to have a global awareness, like to be in the room and to be aware of everybody in the room, and even if you're talking to one person, and when is it really important to just really be with one person and not sort of go out. One of the things that I've also found very helpful in relationship and in mindfulness with other people is to keep some of the awareness on myself and the body. And there's a way of, if I get totally absorbed into the content of a conversation, there's a way that's actually, I can be less present, because I'm so caught up in the ideas and my own thinking about the ideas and what I'm going to say next. Whereas if I hold something back, and maybe even as much as 60 or 70% with my body, there's a way it can listen more effectively, or something, getting the words through the body, and and then what comes forth is maybe more natural, is more in tune. So something like that, being natural, having that flow of.
part of what came up listening to you and listening to myself was that actually a little bit of what's happening, and that's versus flow, is a bit of resistance to the everyday,
Yeah.
right? And so then, of course, that contracts and shuts down and creates the suffering. And so that opening to the moment, like you're talking about, is the opposite of the resistance.
Yes. Yes.
The expansion and being in this, that's great, and yet if we flow with when there's needed focus, or our attention has to go to washing dishes or whatever, if we resist that, then of course we're not, but if we go with it,
Exactly.
then it's fine.
So that open, expansive feeling of oneness or feeling of peacefulness, that comes from the absence of resistance. And it just turns out it's usually easier to not resist the sort of peaceful, calm state, if that comes up, rather than, washing the dishes or have a difficult conversation or being in traffic. And so the practice always comes back to tracking our resistance, which is another word for clinging, which is what produces our suffering. We tend to think that our suffering comes from physical pain, difficult things, difficult emotions, and that's part of it. But for most of us, the much bigger part of this of suffering, is the resistance to it. Is the resistance to the mind is this way right now. The mind is this way. The mind is going 100 miles a minute, or there's a lot of irritation coming up towards so-and-so or this or that. And practice is always the willingness to be with how our experience is right now. And once we really get that, it's so freeing, because we're always having experience. Practice is not about waiting for a certain kind of experience and then being with that. It's about being with whatever experience we're having. And when we're really willing to be this moment fully, that's when it's like, oh, something can release. And it's an amazing experience to have something, it's like two things are happening at the same time. Something really difficult or something really unpleasant. And it's totally, really, really okay. And those two things happening at the same time is what's freeing, is what's, if we just wait until everything is perfect, we're just going to be waiting a long time, and good luck. I remember one time I asked the teacher in the kind of a formal question and answer. The Buddha teaches that there's suffering and there's an end of suffering, right? And so I asked the teacher, is there an end of suffering? Is there an end to suffering? And he said, no. You're suffering? Okay, congratulations, you're alive. And it's like, what? But the Buddha said, there's an end of suffering. And yes and no. Some suffering may end, and some suffering may get sort of folded into our life. So we're not separate from the suffering. And it's not our problems are not really problems anymore. We've opened and opened to the extent that it's just us. It's just who we are in this moment, and we have the understanding that this moment is going to change into the next moment, and into the next moment, into the next moment. So thank you.
It seems there's no end to a part of me wanting things to be exactly how I want it. whenever I
Yeah.
want it.
Yeah.
It just goes on and on and on.
And it's beautiful, and seeing that and what is it to fully open to that part of ourselves that really deeply wants things to be different, and giving care and love and kindness and bowing to all of it, bowing to the part that wants it to be different, the part that knows it can't be different, the part that, well, surely there has to be some way it can be different, right? I think a big part of practice is coming to a deep acceptance of our humanness, of our humanity, of the impermanence of the mind that's never going to really be the way we want it to be, and that's really okay. It's not about, practice is not about getting the mind finally to be how we want it to be, or it's maybe this coming to this deep acceptance of the messiness of it all, and the messiness of other people, that we're all some mix of awareness and awakening and delusion. It's like, and hopefully we're, there's more and more awareness coming in, but it's always going to be a mix. And one of the things I notice of people who I admire in practice, who I feel like who have some kind of maturity in practice, is this. It's almost like this sense of surrender. They've surrendered to life as it actually is. And sometimes it takes some truly deep suffering, some deep separation from something we love or someone we love, to really jolt us out of that sort of ongoing fantasy of like, oh, it really can be other than this, or really it should be different. Things should really be different than the way they are. And so that sense of surrender, of deep acceptance, of just bowing to it all, and then in a way, meditation practice becomes not so much this chore or this, this sort of like fighting against the currents of, but really the celebration, and it's not, and we're not so, we just know. Sometimes it's going to be like this. Sometimes it's going to be like this. Sometimes the sitting is calm and relatively quiet, and sometimes it just feels like we're being thrashed around with a lot of turbulence. But it's okay. It's that's just the way it happens to be. Is there anyone else who hasn't spoken who would like to say something, or? I feel like in a way, these were all such great questions, and they and in a way it's it makes a big difference to how we experience our sitting, how we experience our life, to sort of be clear, to some extent of what we're doing, when we sit, and what, without judgment, without but really looking at, what's happening right now, and then how am I relating to it? Is there resistance here? Is there pushing this away, or is there acceptance? And just noticing. And I really appreciate the sharing about the I can feel this the suffering that can come from thinking, and I have a lot of trust in this practice, a lot of trust in over and over the magic of being willing to come back to this moment, and how what we're experiencing in this moment, and being willing to face it and be with it, even if it's a lot of thinking, even if it feels like it's endless. That the courage that it takes to sit with our minds, however they are, that's the magic. That's what makes an opening to being more present, more free, more accepting of ourselves as we are, and of other people as they are. The more we can accept ourselves, the more we can be with others in a free way. When we have a lot of when we're not patient with ourselves, that's probably true that we're not that patient with others as well. So it's a beautiful thing that we're offering to ourselves, and that we can then share with others in our life. So I thank you for your practice and your willingness to sit in the fire. Thank you.